two planetary bodies then fuse back together again. And when they fuse back together, the higher beings that are working in the sun can now work upon the human faculties in a way that's unhindered. They don't have to worry about these other substances or these other beings who have revolted against them. And so they reunify. The schism between the upper and the lower human reunites, and the whole thing goes back into the cosmic abyss. And that's old Moon. Then we begin to move into old Earth, or let's say the Earth phase itself, which then is subdivided into 4 phases that recapitulate the main events within these phases. You have the Polarian Epoch, in which the events of Saturn are more or less recapitulated. There's this sort of cosmic fiery substance, and there are these little warmth eggs jittering within this cosmic fiery substance. They go through that cycle, fire. Then we move into the Hyperborean age. And then we get, you have the physical body, then the etheric body comes in, fire, the densification from fire to air, and so forth, and we move through close to the end of the Hyperborean age, when once again the separation of the sun from the moon takes place. And once again, these spiritual beings withdraw into the sun, and other spiritual beings remain behind with man on the earth, helping man to try to develop. But as you get the recapitulation of the sleep-wake cycle, you get this sort of weird inversion of what took place before, where during the daytime now, human beings are united with their body, but during the nighttime they leave it. And when they return to the body in the daytime, what they find is that these things are hardening, because as these elements are densifying, and when we're in the Earth phase, you get the water, and then or the water, and then finally we're moving into the phase of solids. Everything is cooling off and hardening. And the physical body, every time these beings descend back down into the physical body the next morning, they're harder. They're calcifying. And then they start withdrawing. They decide that they can't inhabit these bodies, so they start withdrawing to these other planets. And then the sort of Laplace model comes in, takes place, and we get this whirling cloud where these planets start breaking off. And the reason that they break off is because these human beings can't incarnate in these bodies anymore, so they have to create these other outer planets to take up their abode. So they each withdraw to these planets, along with the spiritual beings from the various hierarchies. And they sort of wait out there. But meanwhile, there's this problem now of the calcification of the human body. The thing is basically hardening and turning towards stone, and would have turned towards stone. Everything is hardening on the Earth, were it not for then the separation of the moon from the Earth. So the moon and the cosmic beings that are associated with the moon now pull out of the Earth. It's a sort of cosmic crisis. And they take with them all the toxic, poisonous elements and the calcifying elements that are making this thing harden too fast. And they pull it off with them. And Yahweh is one of the beings who lives within the moon, one of the moon beings. The Christ being lives within the sun. And both beings are working down on man, working on him, helping him to. But now what happens is, all these hard elements have withdrawn, everything suddenly gets softer again. Now these beings start descending down from the planets, and they immediately start taking up their abode within these human physical bodies, which still aren't technically solid yet, just more solid than they were over here. And so there's this process where human beings are now ready to incarnate within the Earth, but now there's a new problem because certain beings who have broken off as rebellious spirits from the sun now find out about what's going on with this human process, and they begin to infect the astral body. These are the Luciferic spirits. Lucifer is a light being. And they break in and begin to infect the human astral body. Now remember, the Luciferic spirits tempt man towards spiritual inflation, tempt him toward believing that he is a god and can just become a god. And then he has no need to go through the incarnation process or deal with the realm of matter at all. So now human beings, because their astral and etheric bodies are becoming polluted through possession by these divine beings, now have to begin the reincarnation process. Because these sheaths have to be purged out now through repeated lifetimes. So there's, like I said, everything that's in the New Age you can find in Steiner, this idea of demonic possession. There's a precedent for it right in there. These beings are infecting the astral body. They come in through the astral plane, and they can and do take possession of human beings. They get into the astral body and pollute it. And by the way, when the moon had withdrawn, you also have the separation into the sexes. The sort of male and female sexes separate. Up to this point, humans have been androgynous and have reproduced by sort of asexual, just cloning themselves. But now you have sexual dimorphism coming in, and you get this idea of the next generations not being clones, and that introduces a new kind of diversity for the reincarnation process to take advantage of, to begin this process of purging out these demonic beings from the astral and etheric bodies. And so that whole process begins. And then this now, we've moved into, I've jumped ahead, we've moved into the Lemurian Epoch, which is the third Earth epoch. And all of this is sort of Steiner's version of the fall, when the moon pulls out, the schism into the sexes, and Lucifer corresponds to the temptation in the garden. The Luciferic beings come in, take possession of man's astral body, and now the reincarnation process is set moving. I'm leaving out lots and lots of information here. This is actually unbelievably complex. This is all I've actually been able to remember from this myth.
That's all? That's all?
You should try reading Outline of Occult Science. I had to read it something like 5 times. And then these Lemurian beings are these sort of giant. This corresponds to the giants in the Genesis 6, the Nephilim, the offspring of the human and Nephilim. There's these sort of gigantic beings which have yet to solidify. And for one reason or another, they do themselves in, and there's a catastrophe. The continent of Lemuria sinks, and then you move into the Atlantis period. So Steiner is still coming out of this whole age in the 19th century when people still believed in the possibility of Atlantis, and they still do. I mean, it still gets, this New Age myth still gets recycled. And so we have the Atlanteans. And now what we begin to get is the solidification of the human form. It starts to solidify and resemble what it resembles today, somewhat. The etheric body begins to retract and slowly pulls in and becomes about coterminous with the actual physical body, so that the two have about the same shape. And then, with respect to the Atlanteans, he says they had these incredible clairvoyant abilities where they could still commune with the gods. And these avatars would descend down from the cosmic planets. They would descend down as avatars, take on human form, and teach them all the various arts, just like the Nephilim in Genesis 6. They would teach them everything, the arts of civilization. And the Atlanteans had incredible memories. They weren't very intellectual. They didn't have intellectual capacities, but they had incredible memory. And they had clairvoyant abilities where they could still see that if they were speaking with an avatar, they knew that it was an avatar before them, not just a human. And so they were working with all of this. And they had a certain kind of technology, Steiner says, where, in our technology, it's based on extraction of sort of mineral sources from the earth. Their technology was based on the etheric world of the plants. And they had a sort of plant technology. I'm not sure how it worked, but he just says they have this plant technology. And then they go through their cycle and they do themselves in. A flood or something happens. I think it's a flood. It's a volcano that destroys Lemur, and then a flood that wipes out Atlantis. But before this has happened, certain initiates within Atlantis know that this flood is coming. And there are these 7 schools within Atlantis that are called oracles, and each one is the school corresponding to a particular planet, corresponding to the initiation into the mysteries of each one of the 7 planets. And a leader appears among them named Manu. This is the old Hindu legendary sage. And he appears among them, and he selects one from each of these schools, one of the best, to take with him. But it turns out that these individuals, the Atlanteans, are already beginning to lose their clairvoyant abilities to communicate easily with the gods as they approach the end of their culture cycle. And these individuals aren't very clairvoyant, but they have good intellects, and they'll need it in the next age. So what happens is that Manu goes to this sort of head oracle of each of these schools, and he takes copies of the etheric bodies from each one of these. Now, Steiner has developed something that he calls spiritual economy. And it turns out that the reincarnation process isn't quite so simple either. The spiritual world is such that when certain etheric bodies or astral bodies have been developed,